Hello and welcome to Freed Indeed Live. I'm your host, Kevin J.N. Hughes, and today I want to talk about a unique argument. It's one that I haven't heard a ton of apologists make, but it's one that really resonates with me. So before we get too far into it, I do want to remind you guys to check out God the Father Apparel, and that's godthefatherapparel.com. And at checkout, use promo code FREED. That's FREED, FREED. So use that. And when you use promo code FREED, you'll get special deals and you'll be helping to support Freed Indeed Ministries and all the work that we do here, not just this show, and at Caleb's Corner as well, but also our yearly Christmas family and all of the other things that we do here at Freed Indeed, all of the work we do in the community, our counseling ministry, everything. You'll be helping to support all of those endeavors. So, without further ado, like I said, I have a unique argument. I already foresee that in the comments I'm going to get some hate from atheists who are going to say that this is stupid, but I don't think it is stupid, and I think that if you hear me out, you'll see what I'm talking about. So, one of the things that we've been discussing, one of the things we will be one of the things that you'll have seen me discuss on Wednesday of this week is the case for the creator. And one of the discussions that in this book Lee Strobel has with Stephen C. Meyer is whether or not scientific knowledge is the only kind of knowledge that is valid. Let me see if I can find where exactly this is discussed in here really quick. So, because I'm not going to talk about this a ton but I am going to discuss it on Wednesday as well. But Stephen C. Meyer says, ironically, to say that science is the only begetter of truth is self-contradictory because that statement itself cannot be tested by the scientific method. In other words, science can't be the only begetter of truth because science itself can't prove that statement. So that statement could not be true if science were the only begetter of truth. And there's other reasons as well, but this is the hallmark of atheistic apologetics. Atheists will often try to attack the Christian worldview by saying that they want proof, and then when you show them different types of proofs for the existence of God or what have you, they just say that's not proof. Show me something within the realm of science. But the problem is that scientific proof isn't the only kind of proof that exists, and it's not even necessarily more reliable than other types of proofs. And one example that I have that I am sure is going to be controversial, but I think that if you're honest, you'll have to agree with me. I do not believe that you can come away. Let's set aside the issue of God for a moment. I do not believe that you can come away from an honest examination of the evidence for the paranormal and in general and spirits in particular without believing that spiritual entities do in fact exist. I'm setting aside for the moment the existence of angels, demons, and even God. I'm setting aside all of that for the moment. I do believe that those things exist, but I'm setting that aside for the moment and simply talking about spirits in general and the paranormal, even more generally, the paranormal itself, but especially the existence of the spiritual. I don't believe that a rational person can examine the evidence and reject the existence of the paranormal. And yet, by its very nature, the paranormal is outside of the scope of science. You can't study ghosts scientifically. People try, people come up with all kinds of methods of trying to do just that, but you can't because they're outside the realm of science. And you'll never find scientific proof of the paranormal. And the reason you'll never find scientific proof of the paranormal is not because the paranormal doesn't exist, but because science itself is limited in its scope. And by its very nature, the paranormal is outside of the scope of science. Now, let's examine. Sorry, I'm a little under the weather, so you'll have to forgive me. Let's examine just a couple key issues. So, the existence of the paranormal is so thoroughly demonstrable that if you were to hold a court of law and the existence of ghosts or spirits was on the docket, if any jury followed the oath that they take to be impartial to the best of their ability and honestly examined the evidence for the existence of spirits, not a single juror would be able to deny this, and it would be found to be true. This is not only true of spirits, this is true of many other things. This is actually one of the reasons why cryptozoology is something that people still study, because there are some so-called cryptids for which there is enough evidence that if a court of law was held to decide the issue, they would, if they were true to their oath, have to conclude that these cryptids do in fact exist. And there have been creatures throughout history who were assumed to be purely mythical and were later discovered to in fact actually exist in the world, which keeps the study of cryptozoology going. Now, I already know I'm going to get made fun of, so in for a penny, in for a pound. The paranormal is the same way. In fact, I'll go a step further. There was such a case, and it was covered by Mr. Ballin. I'll go ahead and include the link in the description below so that you can see Mr. Ballin's coverage of that, because I do think that Mr. Ballin does a great job of explaining this story. Oh, I can't find it now. But here's another story from Mr. Ballin. It's a true story of a woman whose house was haunted, and the police themselves confirmed that they could not explain what was going on apart from a haunting, apart from the paranormal. And if you know anything about police do not like to acknowledge that something is paranormal. Police will labor diligently to prove anything but the paranormal. Same with the military. People in the military do not want to accept a paranormal explanation because there's really nothing that they can do about the paranormal if they're the military or the police. And it's sort of outside the scope of their own parameters. So They don't like that. So, but yet there are stories time and again where events are inexplicable apart from the paranormal. One of these is a story from Germany in which, and Mr. Ballin covers it, so I'm going to include a link to his video in my description, but, and you can watch that yourself. But the, there was a young woman who passed away tragically, and her mother found the story very suspicious. So her mother began doing some occult practices and ended up having a kind of communication with her deceased daughter. And her deceased daughter told her some things that caused the coroner, this German coroner, to realize that something was in fact amiss. And furthermore, the mother couldn't have known that, couldn't have known, there were certain details that the mother couldn't have known, that when she said these things, it alerted the coroner to the fact that something was up, because the mother knew things that she couldn't have known on her own. And when he re-examined the body, he found that in fact the woman's neck had been snapped and she had been murdered, and or unalived, as YouTube is fond of making us say. And so, because of that, they were able to convict her husband, who had killed her, who had unalived her, of this crime. And the husband ended up being convicted, interestingly enough, on the testimony of the woman who had seen the ghost. And the jury actually acknowledged that it was the paranormal events that convinced them. Now, that's just one story of many stories that I could point to. There's also the life of Ralph Sargent, who was a New York police department detective who, through some encounters with the paranormal, ended up becoming involved in exorcisms. He actually ended up leaving the police force and working full-time with the Roman Catholic Church, working under various exorcists. So that was something that, here's a police detective who went from not believing to so thoroughly believing that he would actually make a career of it. And there's many other stories. There was a platoon of I think they were Green Beret, if I'm not mistaken, but they were in Afghanistan, and they had such horrible paranormal experiences there in this one bunker in Afghanistan that they ended up actually opening fire on these spirits, and they heard the voices of the dead speaking to them. They had all kinds of these paranormal experiences. And here's the thing, these experiences can't just be explained away, because none of these, you can't tell me that an entire platoon of soldiers had a hallucination, none of whom, by the way, had mental health problem. None of them were schizophrenic, nothing like that. So you would have to believe that a whole bunch of people who were mentally sound all had a hallucination and all saw the same thing in their hallucination, which caused them to have this experience. If you just look up footage of the paranormal on YouTube right now, you'll see video after video. Now, some of those videos are faked, but even if lots of those videos are faked, there's still lots that certainly are not fake. There's lots that defy explanation. And there's lots of people who you would have to believe are either very, very good liars or are telling the truth and have had paranormal experiences. There's cases of exorcisms. There's which um really can't be explained away. There used to be attempts to explain them away, but the reality is that the medical and mental health community have by and large actually acknowledged that they don't really have an explanation for these things. But I have an explanation for these things. It's paranormal. The discipline of parapsychology has developed in large part to study a lot of these paranormal phenomena and has not been able to prove. Since the 1960s, they have been trying to, in a lot of cases, so a lot of people enter parapsychological research in the hopes of proving the paranormal or studying it, but a lot of other people enter actually in the hopes of disproving it, and none of those people have been able to disprove it. Many of them have gone on to become believers. You also have to acknowledge that if you disbelieve in the paranormal, you are frankly in the vast minority, not only of just rational people in the world, but even of scientifically minded people. For example, Albert Einstein, a famous mathematician and scientist, was also famously a big proponent of the existence of the supernatural and of spirits in particular. And he tried to come up with a materialistic explanation for this, but he vociferously defended the fact that death is not the end of our life. You also have example after example that we went through in our book club on the soul after death. And I would encourage, I'll actually include a link to the first session or two of that book club as well, because because the studying the soul after death, I don't again, I don't believe that you can be a rational person and examine the evidence in an unbiased way and come away disbelieving that these things happen. Near death experiences, after death experiences, out of body experiences. All of these are things that cannot simply be explained away. And I discuss that in The Soul After Death. So I'm going to give you guys some of the links for these things so that you can see and hopefully make up your own mind. But my bigger point for this particular show is not so much to examine a lot of this evidence. We can do future shows where we examine some of these stories, where we examine some of this evidence. We can do that. But there's lots of YouTube channels doing that. Look up The Paranormal Scholar, look up Mr. Ballin, look up my Soul After Death series. We've seen it. It's out there. I'm willing to examine it with you guys. If that's something you guys would be interested in, leave a comment below and just say that you would like to see more of the evidence discussed on this channel, I'll be happy to do that. But for right now, I'm probably just going to link you guys to the work I've already done and to the work that people like the Paranormal Scholar are doing, Mr. Ballin again. I'll link you to that work and you can see the evidence for yourself. Um, by the way, I don't endorse everything that those people say, but they do a good job of honestly examining the evidence. They're not like the goofballs at Ghost Hunters International or whatever. Which by the way, I hate all of those shows, and one of the reasons why I hate them is because I don't believe that they really take the paranormal seriously. And I also have noticed they try to come up with these sort of scientific examinations of something that is outside the scope of science. The point I'm making is that once you examine that evidence, I don't believe you can come away disbelieving that the paranormal does in fact exist. Not if you're a rational person. I believe that choosing not to believe that ghosts exist is an irrational position because you have to either ignore all of the evidence, which is what most people do. Most people just don't look at the evidence. And if they don't look at the evidence, then they can just deny it. But those who do look at the evidence have to reject the testimony of their own senses in order to, and have to reject the testimony of their own reason in order to disbelieve in the paranormal. And that, by definition, is an irrational position. Now, here's the problem. Once you come to that conclusion, like I said, I'm going to link evidence that I've presented. I'm going to link evidence that other people have presented. Once you examine that evidence, and I'm willing to examine the evidence with you all, but once you examine that evidence, you have one of two choices. Either you can essentially deny reason and be irrational, or you can embrace the truth that supernatural, paranormal, whatever you want to call it, events do in fact occur, and that these things are outside the scope of science. But if you do that, then you create a problem for the atheist, because the atheist does not have then the ability to say that that they don't have the ability to just flat out reject any evidence presented to them for God, because you would have to, by that same irrational special pleading, deny the existence of the paranormal, and the paranormal is simply irrefutable because it's everywhere. Now, here's the thing. I know that I'm going to get made fun of for saying all of this by atheists, but I've actually noticed that when I make this argument to atheists, the responses that I get never actually address the argument itself. They just say something like, you're stupid, you're an idiot, you don't know what you're talking about, or they just flat out say there is no evidence for the paranormal, which is exactly what I'm saying. You have to be irrational and just deny the evidence that is right in front of you in order to disbelieve the paranormal. Or they say that I'm insane and I'm schizophrenic. I get told that by atheists too. Well, you're just schizophrenic if you believe you've seen spirits, and everybody throughout all of history who's seen the paranormal, we're all just schizophrenics. So the vast majority of the human race have all just been these schizophrenics who couldn't distinguish between reality and fantasy. I find that much more difficult to believe than that ghosts are real. So, yeah. So pay attention to the comments below, because I guarantee you there's going to be some people calling me mentally insane, and there's going to be some people just saying, well, there is no evidence and you're stupid for thinking there is. Um, and then there's going to be some people who just who just flat out deny the existence of the paranormal, but always based on nothing. No one honestly examines the evidence and comes away disbelieving. No one. Every time I see something where people are saying, oh, I examined the evidence, every time what they examined is like the dumbest video shot on a potato, um, where it's grainy and that's it. And they'll say, see, this isn't good enough evidence that this person saw a gnome, so therefore every example of people having paranormal experiences must be false. And that's another thing that I've seen a lot, is that people will say, well, I don't believe that the paranormal happens because I've never seen it. So what if you've never seen it? I've never seen a rhinoceros up close. I've never seen I've never seen a medieval knight. That doesn't mean that these things haven't ever existed, and I've never seen a Bengal tiger in the wild. That doesn't mean there's no such thing as a Bengal tiger. Um, I've never seen Tom Cruise in person. That doesn't mean that there's a vast network of conspirators making these movies and with CGI implanting Tom Cruise in them just because I've never seen him. You have, and frankly, to disbelieve that ghosts exist just because you haven't seen it is incredibly arrogant, because it places your own very limited experience against the testimony of millions of people throughout human history, billions of people throughout human history, realistically, the majority of people throughout human history. And I would point out that you don't know for sure that you've never seen a ghost, because there are plenty of paranormal experiences people have had that involve paranormal entities that just sort of, that for the most part just sort of appear and disappear. So for example, in Chicago there's a famous um, story of Resurrection Mary. This is an extremely common occurrence that has happened in Chicago, where particularly young men are driving and they see a beautiful woman hitchhiking, and a beautiful young blonde woman hitchhiking, and they stop. And when they pick her up, their car becomes extremely cold, and she asks them to drive her home, and either they will, when she gives them the address and they drive her there, she has asked them to drive her to a cemetery, and it's Resurrection Cemetery, and when they um look over to ask her, are you sure this is the right place, this is a cemetery, she's gone. um this is a really common experience in Chicago. This is not something that can just be explained away, because lots of people have had this experience. So it's not just, unless there's just tons of people in Chicago who can't tell the difference between reality and fantasy, um this and who are all fantasizing the exact same image for some reason. So it's a super common hallucination. Um, this is something that is very common, um, and can't be just explained away. Anyway, like I said, I can examine more detailed things if you want. I'm actually planning on setting up a separate YouTube channel to discuss the paranormal more, so stay tuned for that. Um, but in the meantime, well, that's getting set up. If you guys want to discuss more evidence for the existence of the paranormal, we can do that. But I just want to say that once again, I don't believe you can be honest in examining this issue and come away believing that the paranormal is not real. But that presents a huge problem for the atheist because he's left with either refusing to examine the evidence, examining the evidence, and then deliberately being irrational, or embracing something that doesn't really comport with atheism very well. So, if I have some people out there who want to prove to me that atheism can be rational, then show me how the existence of the spiritual can comport with the atheist worldview. And until then, please share this with your friends, especially your atheist friends, so that they too can be freed indeed. Thank you for watching, and God bless.